Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this edition of Benchmark, Arittha Wikramanayake, the President Partner of Nithya Partners, is with us today as we look back at a tumultuous year-end on the political front for Sri Lanka. The LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index took a hit in December, shedding 20 basis points. More on this from Nielsen's Managing Director, Sharang Pal. And LMD's columnist Shiran Fernando brings this edition of Benchmark to a close with his assessment of Sri Lanka's macro outlook. That's the lineup on Benchmark.
Hello and welcome to the very first edition of Benchmark for 2019. I'm Savitri Rodrigo and a very happy new year to you. We all have hopes, we all have dreams, but the tail end of 2018 was a challenging one for Sri Lanka on the political front. But having overcome the worst, what have we learned from this unprecedented turn of events? How can Sri Lanka rebuild its image with the international community in the aftermath of a constitutional crisis? We have with us in our studio as our very first guest for 2019, Arittha Wikramanayake, President Partner of Nithya Partners. Arittha, Happy New Year to you. Welcome to Benchmark.
I wish you the same. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So, we've had an eventful 2018, especially the latter part. What is your overall assessment of the state of the nation right now?
I'm not a pundit. So what I say is not, I'm not talking as an expert, and I'm talking as a layman. You know? As far as the state of the nation is concerned, I have mixed feelings about it. I think we went through a very difficult last quarter of last year, and we emerged fairly okay through that process. And I think we learned a lot of lessons as a part. But I think that incident caused a lot of damage, and we are going to feel the repercussions of that over the next few years. Because the biggest problem, or the biggest issue that came out of the whole thing was the fact that there is very little respect for the rule of law in this country. Savitri, as far as we are concerned, you know the problems that we have economically. We have no exports, right? Our industries are not faring well, right? We are dependent on imports, right? And we need to find a niche for ourselves to be able to be competitive globally. And one thing that could have given us an advantage would have been something like the port city, right? What is the port city? The port city is an area that you designate with predictable laws, where rule of law is respected, and you create a conducive environment for large entities to come and locate. And you're talking about regional headquarters of large global corporations, as an example. Now, what happened over the last few months was that we showed that we have absolutely no respect for the rule of law. I deal with a lot of foreign clients, and the first thing they ask us is, how safe is our investment, right? And they point out to that law which they passed a few years ago, where they nationalized some of the entities like the Hyatt, and that we could defend. We tried to defend it by saying they were assets that were being wasted and something had to be done about it. But here they played around with the Constitution, right? And if you can play around with the Constitution, you can never create the required amount of confidence, right, for an investor of that size to come and locate in Sri Lanka. Okay. Now, we had hopes that this project would succeed. It didn't matter who started it. It was a good project if it worked properly. We are going to have a huge challenge convincing people to come and locate in the port city in the future. Right? And that's going to be the biggest struggle that any government in the future is going to be faced with. It doesn't matter who it is, they're going to be faced with that. Now, that has a waterfall effect, right? It's going to result in property prices in Sri Lanka going to be affected. That's one thing, because everybody watches that, right, to set a benchmark for property prices. Employment, right? We are putting out so many graduates today, and they're expecting high-paying jobs for the future. Right, it's only through that financial city that you could have created that type of job. So I think you need to forget about all that, right? The next thing is, a lot of these countries are worried about the fact that there were no proper investment agreements, no proper investment climate, there was no safety in investment and stuff like that. Now, the the government until now, they've been negotiating things like free trade agreements, and all those things are built into free trade agreements. Free trade agreements today are completely different from what they are not trade agreements. They're not limited to trade in goods, right? It encompasses everything: investment, trade, services, telecommunications. All those aspects are brought into these agreements. Now that's what the government has failed to communicate to the public, right? Now, all that has been now set aside, and I don't know how they're going to restart this whole process, right? So, for me, I think we are in a very difficult situation. So, the state of the nation, as far as I'm concerned, is not something very, very promising. It's very bleak.
Well, Arittha, it's certainly bleak. Very briefly, what are the key lessons and takeaways we've learned from 2018?
Yeah, so the key lessons also flow from the previous discussion we had. Right, one of the first things is, right, you can't really put any trust into any person, right? We put trust into several people in the last election, and they turned out to be a bunch of clowns, right? I don't think you can expect to put faith. You can't put a faith in people today. There have to be systems, right? And unless the systems are in place, nothing is going to change, right? The second thing is, we find that it's very, very difficult to actually get today, right? You got to take it a day at a time, and that you can survive, but you will not prosper. That's the problem, and as a country we need to prosper, right? So we need to address all those issues. Now I can go on and on about the cons, but there are also the pros, which I think we need to highlight, and which I think we're going to discuss later on. And that is that if you really want to, you can change things, right? There were several people seated on a bench who actually changed a lot in this country, and that gives a lot of hope, right? But I think we should take the lesson we should learn from that experience was that we still, we need to get together, develop some sort of vision for this country and work at it, right, without giving up. Again, we had the discussion previously. One of the biggest problems we have in this country is, we like to complain, we don't like to do anything about it. Now again, at the end of 2018, people came out and protested when we came right to the edge of the precipice. Right? We need to speak out at all times. If we have issues, we need to talk about it, and that involves everybody, including the media. Right? Even the media, what you do is you all pick on things that appear interesting. When there are controversies, you all pick on that. You all report what you all hear. But I think there has to be more analysis. We got to look at issues in the broader context and try to push that agenda and get the politicians to listen to us.
You mentioned the people on the bench. Yes, that was definitely a beacon of hope. Those Supreme Court verdicts were, extraordinary in the circumstances. Do you think that those verdicts have actually prompted or strengthened public institutions and enabled them to maintain their independence?
Okay, that's a bit of a tricky question. I don't know whether it has helped public institutions. The problem with public institutions, we'll get onto that after that. But I think it has certainly strengthened judiciary, and I think it has raised the image, I don't think they've ever reached this site for the last, several decades. And again, the interesting thing there, Savitri, is that some of the judges, right, were criticized before the decision. Nobody expected them to come out with this decision, right? And, it's all a question of rising to opportunity. We've had so many people. I'll give you examples. Take President Rajapaksa, right? After the war, if he played his cards right, he would have had his name etched in gold today, in our history books. But what happened? You had all sorts of hangers on who led him astray. That's what happened. Long before that, you were the person who was in the forefront of fighting for human rights. What happened? Clearly, somebody has been misleading him, right? Then you find, it's not only him. Everybody. You take virtually every ruler, every leader in this country. At some point they get led astray by people who want short-term benefits from them, right? But now, getting back to the Supreme Court, I think they rose to the occasion. They showed that they showed that they were capable of fighting against all odds, and they came out with a decision which gave everybody hope. People have respect for the judiciary. Look at what people are saying about the judiciary 3 months before that judgment. Everybody was criticizing the judiciary. There are some cases where before the Supreme Court about people who have criticized the Supreme Court. But with this decision, nobody can say anything about it. And that also had a waterfall effect. It's not only the Supreme Court, you find even the minor judiciary being much braver today in the decisions they're giving. Public institutions, the rest of the public institutions, the less said about them, the better. And that's not a question of incompetence, it's a question of lethargy. Right? What I see, and I've been involved with a lot of public institutions over the last few years, and what's happening is that nobody really wants to do anything. It's not that they can't. They don't want to do anything because they really don't have much leadership, and nobody is holding them accountable.
So time for a commercial break. On the other side, we ask Arittha Wikramanayake about the challenges Sri Lanka will have to face over the next year from a business perspective, and also whether sufficient progress has been made in tackling bribery and corruption. Do stay with us.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
$8,500 done. 1,500 go. Hoorah!
What on earth are you doing?
I'm making money.
You're crazy.
Crazy for money. 10,000 steps done. Who the man? I do it every single day. Show me the money.
So you run 10,000 steps every day, huh? You must be fit.
Some days I do 20,000. Hoorah!
You're with Benchmark. We are talking to the President Partner of Nithya Partners, Arittha Wikramanayake, on, well, the state of the nation and what's going to happen in 2019. Arittha, apart from casting their vote, how can citizens actually get involved in the political process to ensure that their interests are safeguarded by representatives in office and hopefully the representatives are held accountable for what they promise?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think what's happened all these years is that we think that by just casting a vote on election day, we are going to change everything and everything's going to be hunky-dory. That's not the way it works, right? And we have to constantly speak out on what we believe, right, is right. Look at all these issues, and it's very frustrating, Savitri. And there are so many things that I've been involved in. I've been helping on several things. This government as well as the previous government. Nobody is actually willing to come out and speak out on issues, and you really don't know how people feel about things. They love to go for cocktail parties and bitch about everything, right? They like you go to any office at lunchtime, you find people talking about all sorts of problems they have, but nobody is willing to put it down and put pen to paper. You can't do that. Right? If you look at a media, how many analytical articles do you really find? Right? You find people writing on very serious issues like political affairs and stuff like that, but people's problems are not really expressed in digestible form today. That's one of the biggest problems we have. Let me give you an example, again a very controversial subject, and those are the FTAs. Now I was involved in the negotiation of the FTAs from day one, and I'm willing to defend them anywhere and at any place. Right? after every after every meeting that we have with stakeholders, they come up to you privately and say, look, you guys are doing the right thing, do this, we need this. I'll give you an example, shortage of labor, right? We're going to have a huge crisis in the future because of the shortage of labor, right? You know the figures, we've discussed the figures, 1.1 million people in trishaws, right? If you look at, our population is now aging, we have very few people in the workforce, we need to bring in labor at some point. And it's affecting not only the construction industry, it's affecting the IT industry, the hospitality industry, and even the garments industry. You're actually finding people now moving out of Sri Lanka because they can't find workers in any of these areas, right? Now, why can't these people speak out and say, look, we have an issue, right? Why don't you do something about it? Okay, now getting back to the vote. So voting is one thing, but then you got to articulate your problems after that. Let the people you elect know what you want. The second thing is, I think, one of the problems that we have is we are content in letting the political parties select the people who are sent to parliament. Right? And I think we need to demand that they look at, they have some sort of rapport with their potential voters and who should be sent into parliament, their qualifications, their qualities, their background. None of that is done. When you get a list of people, we include all sorts of people, I don't want to go into detail, and we select a name and send them there. So, again, we need to change the way we look at all these things.
Who would drive this, Arittha?
It's a public. We have to do it. And unfortunately, we also don't really care. We are islanders. We have got used to living in our little bubble, and we really don't, none of these things really affect us. When you think about it, life goes on. Right? Even, take all this, we are getting into bribery and corruption later on. Do you really think the person on the street understands how bribery and corruption affects them? Do they realize that they are paying for it? Take the governors who are elected. How many governors elected over the last few days? Do you know the cost of that? Just check and see how many car permits each governor is permitted.
Now that you've brought in this area of business, from a business perspective, what are the challenges Sri Lanka is going to face, the private sector specifically?
Yeah, again, the private sector, again, instability is going to affect them, right? That's one of the biggest problems that they have. Take a look at the stock exchange, and the stock exchange will speak for itself. I think a couple of days ago, we had one of the lowest turnovers that we witnessed for several decades. So clearly, there is no confidence, right, amongst the private sector to be doing what they should be doing. Look at any new development. Have people actually invested in this country after that? Right. I represent quite a few of these people. A lot of the investments are now made abroad. If you look at the larger companies, right, they are all going out of Sri Lanka to make the investments. I deal with a lot of startups. Every startup wants to set up in Singapore. They don't want to be in Sri Lanka. Right. So it's a challenge.
Now, Arittha, there's that infamous statement made by the president that there were MPs who were demanding sums as high as 500 million rupees to cross over to former President Rajapaksa's camp. Now, that was almost a statement saying this was bribery and corruption. Yes, it happened, and it's okay. Now, has sufficient progress been made in tackling bribery and corruption, do you think?
I think the answer to that. I don't think anything has been done to tackle bribery and corruption. The last I heard that they caught a policeman taking a 3,000 rupee bribe, and a poor man was sent to 7 years for 7 years imprisonment. Right? Our president, again, I use the term president very reluctantly, after what he's done, and you can add that if you want, I don't really care. Right? But here is a man coming out and saying openly that he knows that people have been offered 500 million to cross sides. What is he doing about it? Surely it should have been reported, and there should have been an investigation on that. So the problem is we condone bribery. We don't really care. We know it happens. And, again, Savitri, it's not a secret that there is so much bribery and corruption, but, the problem is, there are a lot of arguments now saying that you need to pay a bribe to get things done, that it greases things and facilitates what happens. The problem is that. The problem is the shuffling of ministries. Right? You have so many, and again, when you listen to some of these stories, they're hilarious. You have clients who've been asked, people come and tell me that they've been asked by various politicians to pay money to get something passed. Unfortunately, what happens is after they make the payment, the minister changes. So the next guy comes. He says, you paid him so much, now you pay me more. Right? So it's a never-ending cycle. I just laugh at these guys. They're such jokers to pay bribes in the first place. But, they don't understand that paying a bribe, actually backfires on you. But again, getting back to the problem itself, very little has been done to tackle bribery and corruption. Now, having said that, it's also our fault, right? Nobody is willing to stand up and make a complaint, right? So to start a bribery investigation, you need a complaint. So people need to come and complain, right? But we are so small that if you make a complaint, you know very well that you will not get another contract thereafter from that ministry. You'll be shut out. Now, in a more developed country, you couldn't do that because there are transparent, bidding systems. And the fact that you make a complaint doesn't really shut you out completely from that because you participate in the process anyway. But here it's too personalized. And there are enough ways of getting out of it. And unfortunately, when going to court, say if everything was perfect, you could go to court and challenge it. But because of delays, it will take you a couple of years before you have your case heard. So for that period, you're shut out of the whole process. So nobody wants to make complaints. So again, we need to look at the problem as a whole, and try to address that without trying to
the band-aid treatment.
Exactly. It's really sad. It's really frustrating. Sometimes it's funny. You sit back and laugh to yourself, about what's happening in this country because it doesn't affect us directly. We'll manage. Our generation will manage. But if you travel around and you see what's happening in other countries, you see, how much they are addressing issues. Even places like India, look at India, we think of them as being, inferior to us and that it's absolutely nonsense. There are a lot of things happening there which, we can't match. Right? So we need to look at it, we need to realize our potential and do something for the next generation. We've been let down by the last generation and we are letting down the next generation because they're not doing anything. The biggest lesson you got to learn, Savitri, is that, we are letting values slip. This is all morality, right? Morality is determined, by the majority. That's ultimately what happens, right? And we are letting things slip now. So in the future, this will be the norm. Paying a bribe, taking a bribe, making money the quick way is going to be the norm, right? And, kids who have been taught not to do that are going to look at you and say, why shouldn't we do it? Everybody else is doing it and nothing is happening to them. So you'll go beyond the point of return and you will never come back to what it was before. That's the sad part of it.
Thank you very much, Arittha. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. Bleak though it may seem, well, we have to prod on.
I think we do, yes.
So we've been chatting to the President Partner of Nithya Partners, Arittha Wikramanayake, on the state of the nation or what the state of the nation is going to be like in 2019. And on the other side, we have Anushan Selvaraja with more. So we wish you once again a very happy new year and hope that your wishes and dreams come true.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
Done. 1,500 to go. Hoorah!
What on earth are you doing?
I'm making money.
You're crazy.
Crazy for money. 10,000 steps done. Who the man? I do it every single day. Show me the money.
So you run 10,000 steps every day, huh? You must be fit.
Some days I do 20,000. Hoorah!
Welcome back to Benchmark. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. Now for a closer look at the latest on the LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index. Joining me is the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharan Pan. Welcome back to the show, Sharan. Now, BCI has dropped quite drastically. Yes, there was political instability towards the latter part of last year. But what are the sensitivities for this movement now?
Yes, Anusha. So, apart from the political instability in the last quarter of 2018, I think a downward trend has been the story of 2018. If I just talk about the average BCI over the last 12 months, it stood at about 103 compared to 117 from 2017. So there is indeed a drop in the overall sentiments with or without the political instability. But yes, the previous month, that is the month of December, the index definitely dropped from 110 to 90, and so was the case with the consumer confidence as well, which dropped from 54 back to 50. So people are still wondering what's going to happen on the political front, though the overall macro indicators are still looking quite stable.
What about investment prospects then, Sharan, going into the new year?
There is still some question, a big question mark when it comes to the investment prospects. Only about 3 or 4% of the leaders feel that it is a right time for investing into the market, which also reflects in their plans for growing their workforce. So not many people are really talking about growing their workforce as of now.
Where do they stand in terms of our economy?
So last month, when there was a new government in place, we saw a significant uptick. Almost about 19% of the respondents felt that the economy will do well in the next 12 months. This month, it's again come back and it has dropped to about 4%, which is quite similar to the average in the last 12 months, which stood at around 6 or 7% leaders saying the economy will improve in the next 12 months. So that's on the economy front. When it comes to the business front, again, just like the economy, there is a drop this month in the sentiments. Last month, about 1/3 of the leaders felt the business will improve in the next 12 months. This number has come down to about 18. When it comes to the short-term prospects, previous month this number stood at about 28%. It has come down to about 14% in this particular month.
In terms of national and business issues for the country, Sharan, what do they cite as being the most important?
Those still remain the same. The top three being the economy, the political stability, and corruption when it comes to the national issues. When it comes to the business issues, it's again political stability, the value of the currency, and the high taxes. So not any change when it comes to the top three concerns as such.
So what would be your projections then, Sharan, for 2019?
I hope 2019 will be much better than 2018. A few changes are for the good which have already come in. If we have some good political stability and therefore policy stability, we should look at a significant improvement, or if not significant, at least a good incremental improvement on the sentiments in 2019. I hope for that.
Thank you very much for joining us, Sharan.
Thank you, Anusha.
That was the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharan Park. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. Stay tuned.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
Welcome back to Benchmark. I'm Anushan Selvarajan. Now for a closer look at the latest on the economy. Joining me is economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Welcome back to the show, Shiran. Now, just to start off, how did 2018 progress in terms of our economy?
So 2018 has been very, I think, interesting year. I think all years in Sri Lanka's economy is quite dynamic, and 2018 was no different. At the start of the year, start of 2018, the expectation was that some of the macro stability, at least that we were seeing, both on the monetary policy side and some of the fiscal side, would continue, and we'll be able to build a certain degree of buffer to face some of the, some of the risks, some of the debt risks, some of the external global risks. And I think that story sort of moved into, at least in the first 4 or 5 months of 2018, where we saw that relative calmness. Then I think global markets changed, sentiment in financial markets externally changed, and Sri Lanka had an impact with a consistent stream of outflows from, I think, late April to even till the end of December. That didn't help, and the dollar was strengthening, emerging market currencies was under pressure. Sri Lankan rupee, as most would know, has really been under significant pressure and stress. And there wasn't too much of reforms that took place. Yes, there were a few free trade agreements signed, a few things on the trade side which was positive. FDI numbers have come in more positive, but that also is led by big projects rather than it being more manufacturing or things like that led, which will be pro-growth. Growth has been of significant concern. I think the number is around 3.2% for the first 9 months of 2018. So that clearly shows that growth has fallen off. So in the mixed bag, I think we've seen a lot of expectations maybe not coming up to mark, certain things progressing. And with the uncertainty that was created with the political instability in the latter part of 2018, I think will be the one that will be key to go into this year in 2019 to see whether how will Sri Lanka use policy tools, policy reforms to brave some of the risks that are coming up.
You mentioned the political upheaval at the end of 2018. Now, because of that upheaval, a budget for 2019 could not be presented, but now they will have to present one within the first few months of this year. What do you expect from this budget?
Even in November, I think the expectation was not for a loose budget in the sense, increases in allowances, salaries, basically a consumption boost type of budget. And I think this time it will be more interesting because now the more election cycle is also very much in play, how much more that can be afforded to. A lot of people, the government will also have to see the IMF program. They have to go into the market and raise debt as well. So how much they would have the space to ease, as it were, to have a more loose budget. And where could the taxes be, for example, because I think that has been a key issue or a key conundrum in the last few years. And as a result, we've seen a lot of indirect taxes going up and that having an adverse impact on consumption. So a lot of measures on that side that need to be looked at. It will be interesting to see whether some bold reforms will be announced and whether there will be space for that to be implemented. But I think even with what really will matter is the implementation of this budget. I think we've seen historically as well so much of policies being announced but very little being implemented. This budget is more important in terms of making sure that the public sector carries on and then there is good signaling in terms of refinancing some of the debt as well.
So then 2019, new year, Shiran, what do you hope to see in terms of our economy going forward?
So I think the uncertainty, for example, I think you can't discount it, at least on the domestic front. There will be spells of it, if not prolonged periods of it. How much that will mean in terms of actually executing some of the policies will be interesting. I think the central bank will continue to be quite independent and be providing that leadership in terms of reassuring the investors, so I think that should not be a problem. But the overall concern, I think, is on growth, as I mentioned earlier. How can we arrest growth back into a higher trajectory? Because one way you grow out of your debt problems is, having a high growth level, and therefore that becomes more easier to refinance. So that will be interesting whether policies will look at that, or will they look at quick fixes to just boost consumption and therefore growth. And then there are the external risks. Right now, the Federal Reserve is signaling, or at least the market is pricing not that many hikes, but going into the next year, things could change, and that might have impacts on the dollar and the movement thereon, and then currencies which are priced off of it. So, lot of, I think, variables hang more in the balance in 2019 than it were in 2018.
Thank you very much for joining us, Shiran. That was economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Thank you for watching Benchmark, and we hope to see you again next time.